Buddy, for those of you who don't know, my name is Connor Smith. Today I'll be going over my teaching dossier, which I have adapted into a website for easier convenience. And to maintain a digital footprint, they can be easily accessed in interviews and by any individual. This is to mitigate a disconnect from not being able to open files or any potential corrupted files that might occur. So if you head over to Connor Design Net, you'll be able to access the live version of my website. Once you're here, you'll start to see that there is an abundance of images and text that relate specifically to architecture, which was my field before moving into the teaching profession. In fact, the first image here is my master's thesis project, which is based on Winnipeg and is an accumulation of the site of the 3 buildings and the dock located on the river. And although I don't explicitly say this without going into my master's thesis, I chose this image because it is all about water and architecture and how that forms societal bonds and community, creating equity between all individuals and how to foster relationships and build upon them, as well as some revitalization of industrial spaces, which as a personal note I feel quite strongly about, especially within a classroom context. I start out with a quote from one of my favorite architects. Of female architect names are Indeed, which states you have to really believe not only in yourself, you have to believe that the world is actually worth your sacrifices. This quote is just something that's always stuck with me since the first time I read it, as it really holds a larger perspective than yourself, but that you can contribute to part of that larger community. And that quote is reflective of the image that is portrayed on. As you move further down the website, I split my areas of knowledge and kind of introduced the idea of the placemat by having different clickable images that will take you to different points within the website. As I'm in technology design, I think it is critically important to include my work experience with images, specifically renders that have been approved outside of the NDAS that I've had to sign for work to be released. Most of the drawings that I've done did not get approved, but at least the renders show a great visualization of 3D modeling skills and real-time renders to projects that are meaningful within communities. I also included a section of my education that reflects my education in architecture, as well as starting to introduce my education in Queen's University. As they're the greatly different things, it's important to see that I've been training multiple different areas, especially since I'm going into the design technology field. I also wanted to include craft, as I'm a maker and I have been my whole life, and it is always a fun part to show the different things that we can create within a classroom that is not so similar to the kind of stereotypical boxes that you might make within a classroom, that the ideas can expand further. I also included my professional learning plan within here, a link to a Google Doc with a collection of curriculum documents. These are not all my curriculum documents, but they are exemplars and the ones that I feel like are leading the pack and things I use moving forward. And lastly, I have included my statement of belief. If you click on this image, I don't believe it, I'll take you anywhere else, due to the fact that my statement belief is surely reflected in a small statement underneath, but it can be expanded with a little by clicking the link to the larger 2-page endeavor that you can read. But the initial summary is that I tend to have an approach of a more diplomatic classroom environment that prioritizes students' voice and collaboration to solve unique problems and help with inquiry-based learning and decision-making. I want to emphasize constructivist these practices to create meaningful projects that allow students to see value in themselves in the work that they do. And I want personally to stay connected to the professional world so that I can bring students the most cutting-edge ideals when working on the work that they do, as well as introducing Indigenous teachings as an Indigenous person to foster classroom culture rooted in the 7 grandfather teachings. Lastly, on the front page, I have a bit more about me. I know it's kind of repeating itself, but it is important to note that this is about you, and if anything's worth stating, it should be restated. So I not only have myself here, but I have a Learn More option, and if you click on this option, it'll bring you to the About page, which gives you a little bit more of an in-depth blurb about me. So once you click on the Learn About Me page right next to my image, it'll bring me to a big text right beside another image of myself that basically states that I'm a Métis individual from Red Lake, Ontario. Talks about heritage, growing up in the North, as well as my professional journey of being an architect, learning some hands-on skills and engaging in projects, primarily having a love for woodworking and creating narratives through architecture. And form and design gives you little and about some of my hobbies like video games, but primarily works for design and more creative-based endeavors. And it's here that I've included my cover letter, teaching appraisals, and resume. I'm not going to lie, I hate cover letters. I don't think they should be a thing if you're applying for a job. Clearly you're interested, and the interview will tell you why you are. I think it's more of a way to lead you out quicker, and I think ChatGPT does a great job of editing cover letters so that they are more tailored towards specific role. So if anyone hasn't done this, I would suggest writing it up, looking at the policies, and then copying their policies and putting it in and say, hey, Judgment, I have this as a base. Can you edit it to be more aligned with your policies, and then review it and edit it again if you need. It is for this reason that I think it's useless to go over the cover letter. But I would like to go over the resume, so if you click on this, it should take you to a link with it. Okay, so if you open the link, you'll be at my resume. You see that it says Connor Smith, teacher candidate with my BBT, which is my broad-based technology. Gives you again a little blurb of me, my strengths, my proficiencies, and then it goes straight into teaching professions. The only thing that might be more adept about this resume is I've started working at the Kingston Native Center and Language Nest on Mondays doing their after-school program, and that might be worth putting. In teaching experience, I currently have it in volunteering because it is a volunteering role. However, the amount of work that has been introduced there is more like substituting every day for 2 hours with different lesson plans for more hands-on things. So we've done bead work, like maintenance, air rockets, and we plan to do medicine bags and more woodworking skills just to try to get kids more active in blue-collar jobs. The way that I've structured my resume is by stating the place, my role, and then having 3 key points that can be easily pulled out of giving precise detail to not overwhelm the user. By doing this, it allows for a greater connection to what I've actually done and brings forth kind of the key element. What I might end up doing is, as I have Bell High School twice for 2 different practicums, I might actually end up merging those and creating just a bit of a longer list to save some space as I'm running out consistently. I've included my education, my most fundamental skills, with the top being the most important to the bottom being the least. That's why you start getting more into the graphic kind of technical skills, because people start to lose interest towards the end. And on the second page, I have my work experience. This is not all my work experience, as I have lots throughout the years, specifically in construction, but these are my architectural related to work experiences that are most recent. They show an abundance of skill for physical labor and carpentry skills. I think it's very important to include volunteer work of any kind in your even at the end and keep this close to up to date as possible. The only reason is that this volunteer work shows employers that you are willing to volunteer and you're willing to go the extra mile. Okay, if we head back to the website, you can see that there are teacher appraisals, but I'm going to leave that for you guys to look at. That most of them are the exceeds excellence, as I feel like most teachers in this role were very kind, but I think my first one doesn't have all of those, but the rest too, they are all quite similar, and it's more of an employer thing that they'd feel interested in. So if you navigate to the 2 bars at the top right, and you click on portfolio, it'll start to bring out the different options, such as work experience, craft, education, personal learning plan. If you click on personal learning plan, you can start to engage with the different areas that I have created. So there's not enhancement of auto bringing that into a classroom. How can I bring you the lessons and make a more inclusive environment for everyone going in there? It aligns with the indigenous principles and it aligns with what I'm thinking. I'm not too sure about the behavior log. I think it was an initial idea. I don't think it's something I'm going to stick with. I do think some tracker of some kind. I just don't know if behavior is the right kind of tracker. My second goal is more of a constructive-based idealism that brings in hands-on learning, and I can mix it with different theoretical ideas to have classrooms create tectonic models that create stronger connections between what they're learning about theoretically or practicing into their final projects. And the whole idea is just to make this more of a meaningful thing that students feel a sense of value in the work that they're doing. My third learning goal is I want to be able to strengthen communication, and the image here is a bird box which was used as for years but didn't have measurements written on it. So when I got to about high school, I ended up writing a bunch of measurements on it because students didn't know how to read a measuring tape very well. It was a large percentage of second language learners here, and they didn't know how to read a tape measure either. So this almost acted as 2 different things where they use a tape measure and go, okay, 3/4, okay, well on this tape measure, which is a bunch of lines, is 3/4, and then they can start to actually see what it looks like. So it ended up being a much greater learning tool. Lastly, I want to maintain professional standards, and the way I want to do that is keep up with research and evidence-based practice and technological design to understand how the professionals in the industry are doing the cutting-edge design work or craft work. And then I'll do this by keeping in touch with OAA as I retain my membership status and various other forms of institutions like this, such as the Engineering Society of Canada, so on and so forth. So now if you go scroll it back to the top and go to the 2 lines on the top right corner, you can check out a different area. If you go to portfolio and then hit craft, I think this is important because a lot of these are models for architecture or community-based projects that I've introduced, which is something I want to bring into the classroom, but they are used as a point to kind of justify different activities that students can do and are perfectly capable, whether it's individually or in pair two. I'm not going to engage with all of the units, but I'm going to engage with two. So the first two that I'm going to engage, the remediation railway. This is an architectural model based on a small part of the landscape next to a railway station that was intended to become low-income housing and remediate the land because of the carcinogenic ties that are within and still used in railway maintenance and construction, turning the soil into a brown site, which means that it's too toxic for any living environments. So through natural remediation of plants and a mechanical water-based management system, making it more habitable for individuals, and the residents were to be placed on top to be away from the contaminated soil, with only temporary visitation to be on the ground floor, such as markets or shops that cleared out at the end of the day. The model itself was intended to have a structural component to it, as each member was to scale, and with the introduction of CLT would create line segments like you can see on the bottom right image, and the structure wasn't intended to be connected to the landscape, but having pillars that reach into the ground that would allow for geothermal to circulate the whole building. I know that doesn't come across as there are no drawings here, but there are great relations, and the form of model making in architecture is something that is still in professional practice today, and it gives a clear representation of what can be done. If you scroll down to the bottom and click on teapot and the little arrow, this will bring you to a teapot that I brought in for James' class, as it is created on a lathe and done in a very uncomfortable way, where I turned the body and the head separately as well as the spout, and then essentially had to figure out how to drill it using a drill press going straight through by creating a really weird jig to have a clear line of sight, and then make that spelled olive to allow it to be able to pour water out of. It's an innovation on an existing product that is something that I want to bring into the classroom with a product design course, specifically the grade 11, to see how even an existing ideas can be built upon in new and creative ways. All right, last but not least, if you go to the two lines on the top right and click on portfolio and then click on education, we can start to see the different forms of education I participated in. Notably, I come from a different education setting. Teaching is not my first architectural, was I only maintained my fourth year architectural because I think it's very important, and although this was a group project, I only show the things that I ever was directly involved in, which the model making, and then the drawings that I show in the fourth year are in control studies. I also show Queen's education artifacts that students have created. I do put it before for my architectural master's thesis because it is a published piece of work, and I think it is very significant and important to me, at this being one of the things that is leading the charge when employers look at my dossier or portfolio. Other notable things is my trip to Germany, which I got to work with Dreaming within the area and rebuild a farm that was falling into disrepair. I also have been fortunate enough to have media elders teach me skills in Birch Park canoe crafting, which I hope to share with students one day.